Hey, there's a way to rig a tube bait that completely changes the game on how well that tube skips under a dock. Most anglers don't even know it exists, but once you see how it works, it might just become the standard way you go at it. It's hidden inside the bait, and that's a flipping and skipping game changer. Tubes are already one of the most underrated skipping and flipping baits out there for fishing docks. The bulky body, the hollow center core, give it a glide underneath there as it's falling that can be irresistible to bass, and it can be something different than they're already seeing. The standard Texas rig system for a tube bait, like you'll see here with an EWG hook, a bullet nose weight on some braided line, this is a great way to, if you're pitching around branches or pitching around vertical cover that you can see. But if you're trying to get this thing up under a dock, that bullet nose weight is going to cause that thing to sink. Even if it's pegged, it's going to cause that thing to be weight nose heavy forward. And as you're trying to skip that thing, anything with a heavy nose is just going to be a disaster and tough to skip. So it's not going to work well that way. That external Texas rig really throws off the center of gravity and the weight of the bait and doesn't allow it to skip very well. Here's how I do it. First, I get myself a 4-inch flipping tube. Usually I get the double-walled ones that are, a little bit thicker plastic. And what I like to do is I'll internally weight this. So what I'll do is take a reaction tackle tungsten drop shot weight, and I will internally weight that tube. But to do that, I'll take that drop shot weight, and you see how those drop shot weight have the little line cincher for just clamping onto the line. I'll take a pair of pliers or a knife or a screwdriver, and I'll go right in there and I'll work that thing open. You can work that hole right open, and now that will receive my EWG hook. And as you can see here, my EWG hook will now pass right through there, will pass through that weight, and that's a critical part of getting this system to work, right? So we'll take our weights, and you can experiment with the weights. You can try an 1/8, quarter, or a 3/16, and I've found a 3/16 most of the time is about the perfect weight when you add it with the tube weight. That gets a really nice skip. You could get from a distance, and you can really get that thing under there with a bait caster. So what I'll do then, when I've got that hole opened up a little bit so my hook will receive it, then I will go up into the body of the tube all the way up to the top. Kind of fold your tentacles back and go up there with the front of that weight headed up towards the tube, and now it's up towards the top here, and this is the part you got to fish around a little bit for it. Now you've got to take your EWG hook and you've got to go in the tip, right? And then you've got to go in there with your fingers and you've got to find that thing, and now you've got to grab that weight. And I caught that weight, I got it in there, and now that thing is internally weighted. So when I slide it up and around, that weight has now grabbed on, and that weight is hooked up on the J of the hook, and it is captured in the tube. Now that internally weighted tube has all this surface area to go across the water, and that thing will fire and skip underneath that dock like a dream. And with that 3/16 ounce weight, you can get that thing fairly far back there. And I'm telling you, most bass underneath the dock have not seen a tube come all the way back underneath to them. Because again, a lot of folks are used to setting up tubes like this and not necessarily internally weighted like that. And this thing's not going to skip very well, and this thing is going to skip like a dream. It takes a little bit of a practice. It's not quite as easy as some of the, paddle style trailers on a jig. Those tend to get up underneath there easier. But with some practice, this internally weighted system can really be something different than a jig or something different than a Senko, and gets me a lot of bites and catches me some big fish when the fish are on docks. And sometimes that's in the spring, and sometimes that's in the summer. And you can adjust your weights again for the fall and for how far you're skipping back, and then for what kind of gear you've got. Whether you're using spinning gear, you can get away with some lighter weights and get a little bit slower of a fall. In fact, you can even do it weightless, but experiment with the weights from weightless up to 3/16. So 0, 1/8, 1/4, and 3/16. 3/16 being that summertime weight for maximum distance underneath that dock, fastest fall, and get yourself bit. Here I've got a half of a tube cut away showing you that internal weight, so when I go in the tip and I find that thing and I come through, now that bait is actually hanging there on that weight, is hanging on the hook, and as I work it through into the complete Texas rig setup, you can see that that bait then is hung up on the J and is secured into the belly of that tube. And then, of course, we're Texas rigging that thing, Texposing it on the other side, but attempting to give you that half of a tube visualization there of that weight internal to there and how that hangs on there. But if I'm dock fishing, I will for sure have an internally weighted tube bait, 4-inch flipping tube, on the deck of my boat. It's a deadly tactic and not everybody is doing it. Hope that tip was helpful. Please like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time on the water.